Banks are vital to the economy. Banks are in the business of maturity transformation. They take short-term deposits, which can be withdrawn at any time, and they lend at long maturities, something like a 30-year home mortgage or decades-long government bonds. They're taking money from individuals, which can be withdrawn at any time, and locking it up for long stretches of time in good investments. We talked about the yield curve. Generally, there's a positive slope to the yield curve. That means banking is usually a good business. The bank pays short-term interest rates, but gets long-term interest rates. The bank makes money from the upward slope of the yield curve. Now here we have a T account, called that because of the big T separating assets and liabilities. Now this is an incredibly simple version. Banks are actually incredibly complicated. Banks essentially do not actually know even how much assets or liabilities they have at any one moment, partly because the whole thing is always moving, but also because valuations can change really quickly. But consider this very simplified case. Suppose we had a bank and they have an asset that is one loan of $100,000. They also have $8,000 of cash in the vault. The liabilities are 108 deposits of $1,000 each. They could just have 100 deposits of $1,000 in one loan of $100,000 and zero cash in the vault, but that would be too risky. Now, perhaps you're asking, why did I pick 8? That's a deep question. How risky is too risky? For now, I just made a number. Banks and regulators work really hard to figure out what is the right number, and it changes constantly, so they're never done. Much of the business of banking is trying to figure out how risky can they be. Because the bank makes money from the loan, but does not make money from cash. If the bank is not risky enough, then they're not profitable. If the bank is too risky, on the other hand, then bad things happen. They got to find a balance. In the real world, there's another asset of bank capital, the money that investors put in. But for now, we'll keep things simple. The T account, showing the assets and liabilities, should balance out to zero. Assets should equal liabilities. But part of the magic of finance is one person's asset is another person's liability. For the individual making the deposit, that's an asset. That's money. I have money in my bank account, and I count that as part of my personal wealth. But to the bank, that's a liability because they owe me money. On the other side, some homeowner has a mortgage loan of $100,000, say, which is a liability to them. But to the bank, that's an asset. Somebody promised to pay the bank money, and that promise is worth something. Part of the magic of how banks work is getting depositors to think of deposits as being perfectly safe. But actually, those are loans from the individuals to the banks. Those loans have value so long as not everyone wants them back at the same time. If I decide one day that I want to get my money out of the bank for whatever reason, if there aren't many other people doing the same thing, that's fine. I can have it. But if everybody all at the same time goes to abandon the bank and wants their money back, then they might have trouble. There would be something like a traffic jam. It's weird, but it has value so long as everybody doesn't need it all at once. You know, bank is something like an investment club. People might pool their funds together and invest in a business. Sometimes families work this way. The family get together, provide funds for one member of the family who wants to start a business. They understand they can't get their money out easily. They're restricting their own liquidity in order to make an investment. But a bank is much larger, so it can operate by telling people they can withdraw at any time. And most of the time that's true, but sometimes it's not. Banks are lending for a long maturity. They're locking up their funds. If everybody wants to withdraw at once, there might be a problem. For centuries, banks were unstable because of this. Crypto has institutions that end up looking very much like banks, doing a lot of the work of banks, and then failing the same way as in the old days banks used to fail. Nowadays, the U.S. has a government that made it really simple and guarantees the safety of the banking system. Most depositors in the U.S. just don't worry. Your deposits are indeed safe. The entire U.S. government is backing them up. But lots of other financial institutions have similar issues. They have a mismatch between maturities of assets and liabilities. And when it works, it's magic. But when it doesn't work, oh poop, things go very wrong. Banks have a variety of assets, including cash kept in the vault, right there in the bank or in the ATM machine. They have reserves held at one of the Federal Reserve banks. We'll get to that later. Many bank assets are loans. They make loans to the U.S. government when they buy treasury bonds. They make loans to various other entities such as municipalities. The state of New York sells bonds. The city of New York sells bonds. Many local governments sell bonds. Corporations sell bonds. Apple or General Motors, they sell bonds to banks, which are just a structured way of making loans. Banks make loans to other businesses. Bank makes loans to homeowners, like mortgages. Many loans are securitized, which we'll come back to, discussing those details later. We will pretend that these loans have a value that's easy to know, but the real world is far messier. Folks work in the banks trying to figure out what is the value of these loans from time to time. Now, banks nowadays do not make very many individualized loans. Why is that? Well, they like diversification. Also, specialization of labor, but mostly diversification. Would a bank rather have assets of one mortgage worth $300,000 on one property? Or would they rather have 10 shares of 10 different $300,000 mortgages, each 1/10 of that, in properties in 10 different cities? Duh, that's an easy choice. Diversification is going to be a lot safer. If I put all my eggs in one basket, then I'm going to be worried about that basket. With more different baskets that I can put my eggs in, that's better. Same logic applies to lots and lots of other loans. Many types of loans get securitized. Auto loans, student debt loans, credit card loans, business loans, they're packaged together, bundled up, sliced in different ways, sold in different bits. There's more magic going on because packaging those things together, all those different loans, creates actual value. Other investors are willing to buy the securitized loan for more than the underlying loans would have been worth. They're buying the safety of that diversification. Securitization often involves features called waterfall, where the loan repayments are split. So some bits get the first repayments while other bits get later repayments. Those bits are called different tranches. If there are 100 loans, then the first tranche might get the interest payments of the first 20 loans that repay. And the next tranche gets the interest payments of, next 25 loans and so forth. The ones that get the first repayments are going to be a lot safer. So they have a different value for different investors. Generally, in finance, safer investments have a lower return. Some investors want less risk, even with less return. Others are willing to take more risk to get a higher return. Those different risk-return profiles can be sold at different prices. That's another part of finance magic. Anyway, back to the simple bank. Here it has 108 deposits of $1,000 each, one loan of $100,000, and then an $8,000 cushion. What's the right cushion? A larger cushion would be safer, but not as profitable. Mentioned just now, in finance, there's a trade-off between risk and return. People like to make money, so they might be willing to take a bit more risk. A bank makes interest income on the loan, pays very low interest on its deposits, and use that margin to buy ATMs, pay the bank tellers, rent the offices, run a website. All those things give people the illusion there's a safe and secure institution. Of course, the bank has to pay the CEO and return profit to the shareholders, too. In return for government guarantees against bank runs, the banks are subject to different regulations. For instance, they have to keep a certain cushion, such as 8% or 10%. Let's suppose banking regulations stipulate the bank hold 10% in reserve. just keep the math easy for now. We call that the required reserve, RR. That will lead to a multiplier effect. Suppose there's just one mega bank in the economy. For now, assume zero vault cash. It's an online bank, no ATMs, just electronic bits. If the bank gets 7 million in new deposits, it has 7 million in new reserves. It's only required to hold 10% of the additional deposits in reserve, so it holds 0.7 in reserves, 6.3 loaned out again. The bank doesn't have to hold on to all that money. Keep it just sitting around. The money can be put to work. It's one of the functions of the finance system. If people took their money and buried it in the backyard, it would be essentially dead. It would not be circulating. It would not be able to be used by other institutions or people. It's terrific that we have a financial system that puts this money to work. The bank makes, in this example, 6.3 million of new loans. Those new loans go to somebody who's going to put that into a deposit in the bank. In this example, there's just one mega bank, so it comes right back. They get 6.3 more deposits, which goes back into the bank, and the same fraction can be lent out. That keeps going and going and going. That's how the multiplier works. 7 million in new deposits can be 7 divided by the reserve ratio, which is 70 million of new money because of our system of fractional reserves. Now, obviously, the real world is a little more complicated than that. There are multiple banks, so one bank's loan does not automatically become its own deposits. Some deposits go to other banks. But still, the overall multiplier idea works. That system of fractional reserves can create, but it can also destroy. Confidence can change. When those loans get put to work as deposits in the banking system, it's great. But if somebody takes their money and buys gold coins and buries it in the backyard, then the multiplier just dies out. This all depends on society having a circle of trust. Sometimes people don't necessarily buy gold and bury it in the backyard, but they put their money into foreign banks that are seen as being safer. In that case, there's not going to be a multiplier for the local economy. The multiplier might play out in some foreign city. I'm going to use the word foreign, but at various times in U.S. history, New York was seen as completely foreign to the farmers in the heartland. Part of why a bank crash can be such a huge problem is because the multiplier can suddenly go into reverse. What might seem like small changes can end up having a really big effect.